Moving to Farm Split felt like a dream come true. The town was picturesque, with tree-lined streets and a tranquil atmosphere that promised a fresh start. My apartment, cozy and conveniently located, was ready to become my new home. It was the beginning of a new chapter, and I was eager to embrace it. Jane, my roommate, was friendly and welcoming from the start. She made it a point to introduce me to the town, and we often went grocery shopping together, chatting about everything under the sun. She shared her favorite spots in Farm Split, and I opened up about my own stories and expectations. Our friendship quickly blossomed. We took walks with our 2 dogs, Bobby and Sarah, in the local park. It was a pleasant and relaxing routine that made the new place feel more familiar. Jane seemed like a typical neighbor, an ideal one, if such a thing existed. Her presence made the new city feel less lonely, and I was grateful for her company. However, as days passed, I started noticing that something wasn't quite right. Small details began catching my attention, but I tried to ignore them, not wanting to let minor discomforts disrupt my new life. Jane appeared increasingly fascinated by odd activities, but always offered rational explanations. Still, my instinct told me there was something deeper behind her actions. Though our friendship seemed solid, the facade of normalcy began to crack. Each passing day brought new and subtle signs that maybe I was living with someone who wasn't quite who they seemed to be. That night, waking up at 3 a.m. seemed ordinary at first. The house was silent, broken only by the occasional rustle of the dogs settling in their beds. However, when I went to the kitchen, something outside the window caught my eye. A strange figure moving around. I rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of it, and then realized it was Jane, rummaging through the trash. A chill ran down my spine. What could have driven Jane to do something so unusual at that hour? I quickly went downstairs, trying to stay calm. When I opened the door, I asked her if she had lost something. I expected a trivial response, but what I got was much more unsettling. Before I could finish my question, Jane turned her head with such abruptness that it left me speechless. Her eyes glowed with an odd light, as if an internal illumination was flickering behind them. Her expression was cold and empty, a mask that didn't match the warm and friendly demeanor I knew. Jane tried to mask her unease with a nervous smile, saying she was just checking something she had thrown away by mistake. Her explanation didn't seem convincing, but I tried to brush off the incident. Still, the image of Jane sifting through the trash and her reaction to my presence left a lasting, unsettling impression. In the following days, Jane's behavior grew increasingly strange. Small things, like her frequent emotional outbursts or unexplained restlessness, began to accumulate. What once seemed like a normal friendship was turning into something much more sinister. The growing unease became harder to ignore. I was sharing my apartment with someone who seemed to be revealing a darker side, and the fear that something was deeply wrong consumed me. Every odd behavior was now a signal that I needed to stay alert and figure out what was truly happening. The unease I felt about Jane intensified with each passing day. Her bizarre behaviors became more frequent and disturbing. One particularly unsettling night, I found her in the middle of the house, frozen in a corner of the hallway with a vacant expression. When I called her name, she seemed to snap out of a deep trance, her eyes once warm now reflecting a disturbing emptiness. Another inexplicable event occurred when Jane started spending long hours locked in her room. I tried to respect her privacy, but the sound of whispers and murmurs from her room grew increasingly frequent. Sometimes I heard quick, shuffling footsteps, as if something or someone was moving around inside. Whenever I confronted her about what was happening, Jane always had vague, evasive explanations that didn't make sense to me. Moreover, Jane began exhibiting strange reactions during our walks with Bobby and Sarah. She would often look around with an almost palpable fear, and once abruptly stopped the walk to stare at a group of trees as if she saw something I couldn't. Her movements became increasingly frantic, and her behavior seemed awkward, as if she was battling an invisible force. I started noticing even more disturbing patterns. Jane seemed to have an unusual energy, as if she was constantly fueled by something I didn't understand. She never seemed tired, and her sleep patterns were erratic. Most of the time, she was alert and active at hours when most people would be asleep. This behavior didn't add up, especially considering she had never mentioned any sleep issues or medical conditions. Each of these events contributed to a growing sense of discomfort and mistrust. The image I had of Jane, the friendly and kind roommate, was disintegrating, revealing an entity that seemed beyond human comprehension. The fear that something much more sinister was at play became a constant presence in my mind, and I knew I needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. As the days went by, my anxiety about Jane grew unbearable. The feeling that something was deeply wrong became almost intolerable. I decided I needed to investigate further to understand what was really happening. On a particularly unsettling night, when the murmurs and whispers grew almost deafening, I resolved to act. Peeking through the crack in Jane's room door, I saw something that froze my blood. Jane was lying on the floor, surrounded by strange symbols drawn with dark ink. She murmured inaudible words, her body trembling with what seemed to be almost supernatural energy. The sight was chilling, and I felt paralyzed, unable to do anything but watch. My mind was filled with questions and fears. What were those symbols? Why was Jane involved in such a sinister activity? Each day, evidence that Jane wasn't who she appeared to be piled up, and the feeling that she might be something beyond human grew more real. Her presence at home was becoming increasingly oppressive, as if an invisible shadow constantly accompanied her. Then, I found an old book hidden in a corner of the living room closet. The pages were filled with rituals and incantations describing ancient and obscure practices. Flipping through the pages, I realized that some of the symbols I had seen in Jane's room were similar to those in the book. The connection between her behavior and the book's content was undeniable and terrifying. With the certainty that Jane was involved in something beyond human understanding, my fear turned into deep despair. The idea that I was living with an entity engaged in dark, supernatural practices haunted me. I knew I had to confront Jane and uncover the truth, but I also feared for my own safety. The revelation was before me, but the cost of knowing it seemed increasingly high. The decision to confront Jane and discover the truth was the only way to find resolution, but I had no idea what might come next. The fear of potentially confronting something inhuman was overwhelming, and the sense that something terrible was about to happen loomed over me like a threatening shadow.